From ancient times, three powerful forces have converged to shape our view of life in this world. The first such force, largely unique to the human species, is our profound capacity to love one another. The second is death, the greatest enemy of love. The stark reality that our lives and loves will end in shipwreck and extinction threatens all that we hold dear. Love and death are entirely incompatible. But the human brain is resilient. Therefore, virtually every known culture in the history of mankind has devised strategies to escape the labyrinth of the despair of death. Regardless of the ethereal nature of these escape plans, they provided the basis of the third force, hope. And so, the hope for immortality was the direct consequence of the titanic collision of the forces of human love and death. We're standing at the gatepost of death, cemetery for Père Lachaise in Paris, France. Inscribed in the gatepost behind me in Latin is the phrase spes elorum immortalitate plenum est, or in English, they are full of the hope for immortality. It used to be common to see these reminders in cemeteries. The words Memento Mori are Latin for remember, you will die. And it seems we all need to be reminded. The human psyche recoils at the prospect of death. We live in massive denial. In the back of our minds, we are thinking, of course everyone dies, but surely an exception will be made in my case. In the face of the death toll from World War I, Sigmund Freud studied how the human mind confronted death. He wrote, "The school of psychoanalysis could thus assert that at bottom no one believes in his own death, which amounts to saying, in the unconscious, every one of us is convinced of his immortality. But the rude facts are that 55 million people die every year on our planet, about 6,000 people per hour. 100 every minute, over 1 per second. And with each individual human being is lost a universe of experience, memories, and loves. And every year we pass not only our birthday, but unknowingly we pass the coming anniversary of our death. For the flow of the sands of time and the hourglass of our bodies is inexorable." The quest for immortality has taken various forms in human history. As we discussed in Episode 1, the ancient world invented immortality myths, offering the hope that the immortality of the gods would be shared with our fellow human being. Some of the most popular systems of belief in the ancient world were the mystery religions. While largely kept secret, even until this day, these systems of belief appeared to offer a means of elevating a human life which has a beginning and an end to a realm of immortal renewal. The transfer of immortality from the gods to man was commonly accomplished by a demigod who personified the immortal renewal of life seen in springtime. The demigods in some manner suffered a death like mankind, but the god resurrected in a new birth. This was the reason for the cyclic renewal of life in springtime. The seed died and was buried, but through the power of immortal renewal granted by the gods, it rose again in a second birth. Similarly, ancient people saw immortal renewal in the rising and setting of the sun, or the phases of the moon. But learning the meaning of these signs in the heavens, mankind built systems of belief to give hope that we could share in this immortal renewal, commonly by ingesting this force in what was known in ancient times as the pharmakon athanasius, or the drug of immortality. As we move into the 19th century, the power of the scientific method became manifest. Life itself was put under the microscope. As a result, scientists deciphered the riddles of the long evolutionary history of life and death on the planet. They came to recognize the true origins of death not as a result of a recent conflict with our Creator, but rather as a cellular reproductive strategy. life in its early form as single cells likely had no necessity of death. Cells could die, but not by necessity. They could live on through millions, indeed billions of years as an endlessly replicating lineage of cells. It was only with the evolution of multicellular entities that some cells traversed what came to be known as the Weissman barrier, wherein they were committed to mortality in that generation. Some cells in each generation, called germline cells, retained the original immortality in order to maintain the continuity of the species. Finally, in the mid-20th century, science accepted the observational fact that cells of the human body display a finite capacity for cell division, a phenomenon known as the Hayflick limit. The advent of modern DNA technologies allowed scientists in biotechnology to find the needle in a haystack, the one gene in tens of thousands in our DNA that regulate the mortality or immortality of cells. The clock spring is the telomere, the linear ends of the DNA strands, and the immortality gene is the catalytic component of human telomerase that, like a clock key, rewinds the spring back to the beginning. Telomerase is active in the human germline so that babies are born young, but is turned off in the cells in our body, our blood, bone, and skin cells. As a result, with time, the cells in our body will eventually run down and lose the capacity to replicate, and life will of necessity come to an end. This led to the logical question of whether we could use the immortalizing gene to reverse human aging. Could we accomplish telomerase transfer? Since it is easiest to transfer telomerase into cells in the laboratory, I thought it best to isolate cells from the human germline itself and marry together those cells known as pluripotent stem cells with telomerase. The goal at the time was to make young or even immortal human cells of any kind useful in repairing the ravages of age. Human embryonic stem cells, while engendering significant controversy, quickly became adopted into mainstream science. The use of cloning, however, as a cellular time machine to transport an aged somatic cell back to the beginning of life and back to immortality became one of the most heated and controversial topics of modern medical history. Nevertheless, even this once controversial science is now routine, especially utilizing defined components rather than an egg cell to accomplish the time travel. So as of today, we have powerful new tools to reverse the aging of human cells, and the process can be replicated endlessly. It is possible to take cells from even a 100-year-old person back in time to a state identical to the cells from which that person was born, and make, say, reborn, young, or even immortal heart muscle. And we can repeat that process forever, because we're utilizing the actual force of immortal renewal. There are currently numerous clinical trials underway, testing products made from pluripotent stem cells in diseases like age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness in an aging population. Other applications include the devastating loss of motor function resulting from spinal cord injury. Developing new technologies to the point where they can be used in humans, and the subsequent rigorous clinical trials to demonstrate that the products are safe and beneficial take time and patience. I would strongly urge people in need of these therapies not to seek out unregulated clinics that offer supposed stem cell or anti-aging therapies today. In my opinion, most such centers are really focused on just taking your money. Now let's turn our attention to the future. It is interesting to ponder on just how far this will take us. Will we one day eliminate the biology of aging the way we've eliminated diseases like, say, smallpox? Will we one day consider aging itself a disease? Is immortality transfer possible for the whole human body? In times past, scientists would loudly criticize such claims as dangerous fantasy, science fiction, and certainly not science fact. They would have pointed to the second law of thermodynamics and say that all systems run down over time. It's a principle of nature. But life isn't a closed system as defined by the second law. The cells that reside in our bodies have no dead ancestors. They will die in you and I for the first time in billions of years. It should therefore not come as a surprise that we naturally recoil at the thought of death. Today we have the tools to learn the biology of immortal renewal. A case in point would be the demonstration that the expression of a single gene called telomerase was capable of immortalizing human cells, something that the scientific community adamantly refused to consider possible as recently as the 1980s. But I think we will learn even more powerful lessons from the germline, and these will potentially be of even greater importance. Let's look again at the Weissman barrier. We can see that there are some primitive animals that never age. Thomas Hunt Morgan, the Nobel laureate that defined the role of chromosomes in heredity, studied one type of animal known as freshwater planaria. These animals, if cut in half, completely regenerate. Over a period of a few days, the tail will regrow a new head, and the head a new tail. And they can regenerate forever because they express telomerase in their somatic cells. The entire animal during its life cycle remains on the immortal side of the Weissman barrier. So it's important to ask the question of why we age at all. If evolution naturally selected the most fit organism, why aren't humans like planaria? That would seemingly have survival value. The evolutionary biologist George C. Williams proposed a theory to explain this called antagonistic Pleiotropy. Let's explore this idea a bit. Williams noted at the beginning of his paper that it is indeed remarkable that after a seemingly miraculous feat of morphogenesis, a complex metazoan should be unable to perform the much simpler task of merely maintaining that which is already formed. Williams proposed that there were some genes in the DNA that had a pleiotropic effect. That is, they affected one part of the life cycle in one way and yet another part of the life cycle in an entirely different manner. So let's divide up life into the periods of development where the body is first forming, then the period when we're capable of reproduction, and finally a period in old age. So Williams was suggesting that some genes had an effect early in life, say before reproduction, and a very different effect on life in old age. Since natural selection operated primarily on benefits provided in successful reproduction, if there was an antagonism or a trade-off in the effects of the genes, the benefit early in life would prevail at the expense of the late life effects. So let's consider a gene regulating cell immortality. As we mentioned in episode 3, telomerase is repressed in the body cells of humans. Because the DNA in our cells have long telomeres at the beginning of life, there is at first no effect. But with time, the fuse will burn down in the somatic cells. And because telomerase almost always reappears in cancer, it's commonly believed that this repression of telomerase in the somatic cells benefits us early in life. It reduces the risk of cancer, cutting short our chances of reproduction. But that antagonism, the trade-off in late in life, is that it contributes to aging. Telomere shortening and self-senescence can, for instance, cause our immune system to fail. It can cause chronic bronchitis or pneumonia, and likely limitations in the function of other cell types as well. I'm of the opinion that there is another example of antagonistic pleiotropy, and that this will be very important in medicine. Early in life, when our body is first forming, it has the ability to reform tissues, that is, to regenerate. So if the skin is cut during the first 8 weeks of human development, it will heal completely and scarlessly in about 3 days. However, after development is complete, this ability is turned off. So in you and me, if we cut ourselves, the wound will heal, but it will not regenerate. There will be scar tissue left behind rather than normal skin. The same is true for the heart. After a heart attack, heart muscle cannot regrow. Instead, what was once heart is now replaced with scar tissue, and the same is true for other tissues as well. It's believed that this biology is behind the reason for the profound capacity of some animals to regenerate. The Mexican salamander has a developmental abnormality such that it is permanently stuck in a pollywog-like state. As a result, it can completely and scarlessly regenerate tissues. Perhaps the most striking example is an amputated limb. A far more profound injury than just a cut in the skin, a complete removal of an arm or a leg results in the complete regeneration of the entire structure, skin, bone, nerves, and muscles, leading to a completely functional replacement. What if, like immortality transfer, we could transfer the regenerative potential present in the germline and in very early development to the aged human? What if we could unlock that dormant ability to regenerate the heart or the cartilage in our joints afflicted with arthritis? The platform of pluripotent stem cell technology allows us to make such cells for use in medicine. But what if we could invent a whole body approach, allowing us to induce, even if temporarily, the ability to accomplish tissue regeneration, especially in conjunction with the induction of replicative immortality? This could powerfully unlock immortality transfer. I call such technology induced tissue regeneration, or ITR. So ITR is the induction of the ability to recapitulate embryogenesis in the tissues of an adult mammal by means of the administration of exogenous reprogramming factors. While many interventions in aging offer the hope of extending healthy lifespan a handful of years, ITR, especially in the context of telomerase or immortal ITR, offers a reasonable hope for markedly extending the human lifespan. The next logical question is not so much what science can do, but what it should do. I have made the case in these videos that our love and compassion for our fellow human being should be our guiding light. But not everyone would agree. One of the most common criticisms I hear relates to the world population explosion. Some would say the population is simply out of control, and extending human lifespan would severely aggravate this already ominous situation. Assuming the 55 million people that currently die every year continue to live, we would be adding that number to the 130 million born every year. It is estimated that the world currently holds some 7.5 billion people. Reasonable growth estimates are that by the year 2050, the number will approach 10 billion people. That number would probably rise to 12 billion or more with no death. Wouldn't the overcrowding and the rising costs of healthcare for these aged people simply make life on Earth intolerable and generate an economic crisis? I believe these dire apocalyptic predictions do not take into account readily available birth control. Economists that study the trends carefully suggest that novel strategies to intervene in the basic biology of aging may be the solution to our problems, not the cause.
After 20 years or so of studying budget problems, spending problems, you quickly come to the, well, in my case it might not have been quick, but you come to the conclusion that the big driver of all of our economic problems is healthcare in general, which is the largest industrial sector not only in America but in history for all of the Western world. And that is the driver of increased spending. Now, in recent years, what we have begun to see is the demographic transition really having an effect. Now, this was known in the 1930s. Demographer Warren Thompson's book, Population Problems, was the standard textbook until the late 60s when I think he was a Stanford entomologist specializing in butterflies, wrote a book called The Population Boom, predicting that the world would end through starvation and overpopulation. Demographers knew better. And they were predicting something else entirely, which was that the continuation of lifespans is always accompanied by a decrease in birth rates. So what Thompson and other demographers said is we're going to get a bigger and bigger and more expensive older population with fewer and fewer younger people able to pay down debt. Debt is just sending the bill to the next generation. So now, for the first time in history, we've entered a period where every subsequent generation is smaller than the one before it. This is utterly new in the human experience, and very few people, including financial analysts, have truly grasped this truth. In my profession, very few economists looked at the slowing of economic growth in Japan, the oldest population in the world, and saw that in fact what was happening is the workforce was diminishing, but the burden of taking care of an increasingly older population was increasing. So that is our challenge.
What concerned me, I'd like to know if you share this point of view, not only do we have an increasing percentage of people that are old and a smaller workforce to support them and the economic strains that generates, but we have this surge, like a tsunami coming to our shores because of this baby boom phenomenon. I guess about 76 million Americans, all resulting from soldiers returning home after World War II, which I also understand is shared by other countries. Isn't that true?
That's right, across the board. It varied a little bit in terms of when they were fighting, but all of them had a baby boom.
Yeah. So how much does that aggravate the problem? Is that a incremental aggravation of the problem, or does that multiply it 2 times or more?
Everybody should, as soon as this video is over, do a Google or Bing search, look up CBO Congressional Budget Office 2017 Long-Term Budget Forecast, because the CBO gets it. They are saying there is one driver of debt deficit in the United States. Only one aspect of the budget is increasing in proportion to the total, and that's driven by age-related disease. The last 5 years of a patient's life, they spend half of the entire medical budget of their life. So what we have is more and more people entering into that, but they haven't saved enough in the meantime. So the CBO's report is really quite dramatic, and it's very measured, and policy wonks always sort of try not to be too extreme, but this report is unique in its stridency. It is saying, they paint a scenario where, as this continues, we're going to reach a point where the U.S. government can't borrow the money that it is now borrowing to take care of the aged, simply because we'll become a bad credit risk. As a macroeconomist, it became increasingly evident to me over the years that macroeconomics doesn't have a solution. There isn't even a political solution, unless you think of accelerating biotechnology as a solution. Because what we can do determines old age dependency ratio. When I was born, there were 17 contributors for every 1 dependent. As lifespans increased, that has now, and birth rates fell, we now have about 3 contributors for every dependent. So what we need to do is, first of all, keep people out of the dependent column longer. That means healthy. And if we can, put them into the contributor column.
The age of American population is going up. Throughout all of the developed countries, the ratio of the proportion of population age 65 and over is moving up fairly rapidly, and that is causing a major increase in entitlements, what they call it social benefits, around the developed world. It is far more relevant here in the sense that it's beginning to have a very significant negative impact on economic growth. That's where our problems are.
When I talk to individuals about our ability, science and medicine's ability to do really amazing things, reset the clock of aging in cells and so on, they say, well, I don't know that that's a good thing. And I think what many people are imagining are new medical technologies that extend lifespan at the expense of health span, so more years on a respirator,
Clearly.
basically. And what's so ironic is, and maybe it's just an example of poor communication on the part of medical researchers, is it's exactly what we're not trying to do.
Right.
What we're trying to do is eliminate the chronic degenerative disease to allow people to be, as you say, productive, certainly not a drain on the economy. But that message is out there. Scientists have been saying that for some time. Leaders at the National Institutes of Health and the American Medical Association have been advocates saying that's what medical research is. That's the world we're trying to bring into being. Why do we still have the critics? Why are the Leon Casses of the world saying we're treading on a path no one should ever go? Do you have an opinion, based on economics at least?
No, I don't think it's an economic problem. I think it's a psychological problem. I think people are afraid to hope. We're oddly, if you do the research, you'll find out that nobody estimates how long they're going to live correctly. We all invest based on our parents' lives, but we're outliving our parents substantially. So people don't really know how things have changed since 1900, when life expectancy was 43 or something. So
can you imagine yourself to live to be 150 or 200 years old?
that's the problem, isn't it? We lack the imagination to understand that we're on the crux of the most remarkable technological breakthroughs in history. I often quote Freeman Dyson, who he knew von Neumann, worked with Edward Teller, all of the greats of the last century. And he's saying that as fast as that happened in IT, phones, self-driving cars, the internet, he says it's happening faster behind the scenes in biotechnology. Everybody's going to be surprised by how quickly these things happen. So, we're just not good at change, frankly. There's Heraclitus, the Greek weeping philosopher, who he blamed everything on the inability of human beings to imagine change. And right now we suffer from that.
The amount of money spent on research in the fundamental biology of aging is microscopic compared to the money spent on age-associated diseases. I'm not arguing that we don't do research on those diseases. What I'm arguing is that because they're age-associated, it must be true that old cells provide the milieu or the conditions or the soil for the diseases that are associated with the aging phenomenon. So that an effort to understand the aging phenomenon might provide us with knowledge about the status of molecules in old cells that provide the opportunities for age-associated diseases to be expressed. There's a complete failure to focus on that idea, to say nothing of an almost complete failure to focus on trying to understand the fundamental biology of aging. This despite the fact, and this is a fact that I think is indisputable, that virtually every geriatrician, virtually every physician, virtually every scientist who has some thoughts on this process will state the following, either in the introduction of a lecture they might give or in a paper they might write, that the leading risk factor for cardiovascular disease, cancer, or stroke is aging. Well, it doesn't take more than a 13 or 14-year-old education to ask the next question. Why are we then not studying the fundamental biology of aging?
Others object to the science because they believe it is against their religious creeds. Indeed, as one might expect, the priests of the ancient systems of religious belief have entered the debate. Immortality, after all, is the business of religion. and science is now becoming a competitor. Some prominent conservative ethicists have declared that the cycle of birth, reproduction, and death is God's plan, and that we owe God a death. Death is a blessing whether we know it or not. Others, on the other hand, appealing to the virtuous nature of our love for one another, seek to utilize the science to alleviate human suffering. Francis Schaeffer, a leading evangelical thinker behind much of the current pro-life movement, was a friend of mine. In the 1980s, I asked him a theoretical question. If I were to say, here is a pill that will stop the aging process, would you take it? His answer came quickly. Yes, I would, he said. And why, I asked. He said, it's our duty as Christians, as much as it's within our power, to undo the work of the fall. So if a means were found to reverse human aging and death, it's our duty to find it and bring it to mankind. Others object on a more philosophical level. They argue that the use of this science will not really extend the human lifespan. They will, in a sense, replace it. It's certainly true that our bodies are like a river, constantly changing. Inasmuch as we replace the cells in our bodies with new ones, we are, to that degree, a different person. So the best science can ever do is maintain a sense of continuity in life. Let me provide a concrete example. Imagine that you're on the Starship Enterprise and you're about to beam down to the planet's surface. Just as the atoms in your body are being analyzed and taken apart to be reassembled with new atoms on the planet's surface, there's a malfunction. The result is that you're still on the Enterprise, and a copy of you, complete with your memories, is now walking on the planet, unaware of the problem that's occurred. Scotty pulls out his phaser and points it at your head. Are you okay with him killing you? After all, that's what would have happened in the first place. It's just that you would never have sensed a discontinuity. Well, in the same way, most humans would step into the transporter profound life extension as long as there was a sense of continuity. Replacing the components of an old antique car, we can keep the car on the road forever. We say it's the same car. But the critics would point out that over time, eventually, it is not the same car. It's been completely replaced by new components. This is a fair criticism, but in practical terms, even the transplantation of a heart does not really present an unsurmountable challenge to the identity of the recipient. And cell and ITR-based therapies would likely not severely challenge an individual's sense of identity. As Miguel Unamuno once stated, "For me, the becoming other than I am, the breaking of the unity and continuity of my life, is to cease to be who I am. That is to say, it is simply to cease to be. And that? No. Anything rather than that." On an even deeper philosophical level, I would argue that providing hope in the face of mortality would also have the potential to alleviate psychological pain. One of the clearest examples in organized religion is the story of the early life of Prince Siddhartha that would become the Buddha. His parents, fearing that he would leave them for a life as an ascetic, kept him from the realities of life and death and surrounded him with joy and pleasure. Nevertheless, one day he ventured out of the city gates and he saw reality. He saw an old man, feeble with age, a sick man suffering from disease, and a dead man being carried to his grave by his grieving family. Siddhartha's search for an answer led to the world religion known as Buddhism. More recently, in the light of the discoveries of science and in the age of Darwin, a branch of philosophy called Existentialism was born. The existential attitude focused on the apparent absurdity of life in the face of mortality. As stated by the existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre, life has no meaning the moment you lose the illusion of being eternal. While not known as an existentialist, the philosopher Bertrand Russell would have agreed. In his work titled A Free Man's Worship, he wrote that man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. that his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labor of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation be safely built. And here is where we circle back to love and hope. These sincere descriptions of existential despair are due to a love of life facing the reality of death, without a rational basis of hope. And so modern science and medicine has the potential to alleviate not only physical pain, but psychological pain as well. Others say that it is precisely the anguish associated with mortality that gives life its poignancy. Life without death would be like a sentence without a period. Our lives would be like the Greek gods, and our character would degenerate into narcissism. My experience, however, suggests that wisdom comes with age, and increased age builds increased character. As C.A. Stevens wrote, "Picture the beauty and divine expression of countenance which a life of 5,000 years, even 500, would bring the human face." My hope is that that is a face of love and compassion. To me, the arguments in favor of implementing life-extending technologies far outweigh the concerns. As discussed earlier, the economic challenge we face with aging as it is managed today is simply an intractable problem. I have argued in this video series that science and medicine can and will find means of utilizing the immortal renewal of the germline to increase the quality and even the quantity of life. And I've attempted to make what is at least the initial outline of an Immortalist's manifesto, that love and death are incompatible, that the battle of humanity against death is core to our being and ancient in origin, and that the true measure of humanity, the most stringent test of our character, will be whether we take up the mortal thread of life and with our own hands fashion, as best as we know how, the circle of immortal renewal. This alone provides a reasonable basis of hope that mankind can find the path out of the labyrinth of despair and death.
And so we have an ancient conflict between love and death. And I believe it'll be the defining characteristic of our generation is how we deal with it. As summarized so succinctly by the poet Edna St. Vincent Millay in her poem called Dirge Without Music, I am not resigned to the shedding away of loving hearts in the hard ground. So it is, and so it will be, for so it has been, time out of mind. Into the darkness they go, the wise and the lovely, crowned with lilies and laurels they go, but I am not resigned. Lovers and thinkers, into the earth with you, be one with the dull, the indiscriminate dust, a fragment of what you felt, of what you knew, a formula, a phrase remains, but the best is lost. The answers quick and keen, the honest look, the laughter, the love, they are gone. They are gone to feed the roses. Elegant and curled is the blossom. Fragrant is the blossom, I know, but I do not approve. More precious was the light in your eyes than all the roses in the world. Down, down, down into the darkness of the grave. Gently they go, the beautiful, the tender, the kind. Quietly they go, the intelligent, the witty, the brave. I know, but I do not approve, and I am not resigned.